Hello, and welcome to the Leadership Edge. I am your host, Ted Gorski. The Leadership Edge is a show that focuses on leadership issues that are affecting you on a daily basis. And what we do on the show is really talk about what do you need to do as a leader to deal with those issues and be more effective as a leader. And on today's show, we're actually live on Facebook as well, so welcome Facebook users. In today's show, we're going to be talking about building effective teams. What as a leader, what do you need to be doing? What do you need to be thinking about as you're building effective teams? And what do you need to do to make sure that your teams are functioning at high levels? So a couple of things as we start off the show is, as a leader, there's a certain mindset I need you to be thinking about when you're building effective teams. And the thing you need to be thinking about is you got to be thinking like a mad scientist. What you are doing is when you're building effective teams, you are putting in personalities in various beakers. And as a scientist, you're mixing things together. And as a leader, your mindset has to be, how do I get these various personalities to function well together? When I add a new personality into the situation, how is it all going to be functioning? What are some of the issues that may be popping out? What are some issues that are going to make the team work effectively? Do I have some conflict that could potentially happen as I'm dealing with these various different personalities? So what's important for you to understand is you have to go in with a mad scientist mindset as you're mixing this all together. And it's real important, because here's what's important you be thinking about is getting the right people on the bus. You know, in my time as a leader in the corporate world, this was probably the most important thing that I had to worry about. As I'm building my team, as I'm bringing new team members in, do I have the right people on the bus? We always hear that term. But as a leader, it's important for you to understand, what are those necessary skill sets do I need? What are the personality types that are going to function well together? What are you as a leader? Can I work with this person effectively? Can I really manage and lead this person? And that's a very, very critical question you have to ask yourself. Is this person coachable? Can this person take feedback? Can I communicate with this person? You know, part of the thing when I looked at was I didn't necessarily hire the best person who was the best, let's say, technologist. What I looked at was, yeah, they needed a certain level of skill set to be successful. But what I looked at is the chemistry mix. And the first part I looked at was the chemistry between that person and myself. Can I see whether or not I could kind of manage this person and lead them effectively? And after they got through that hurdle, how would they then operate with the team? And for me was, I needed to understand the various skill sets I needed in terms of people, in terms of problem solving skills and assessment skills. But more importantly, how are they going to operate together as a unit? So getting the right people on the bus is critically important when you're kind of thinking about building effective teams. But we need to look at building high performance teams. When you're talking about building these particular teams, what's important is understanding what is a high performing team. And a high performing team is all about exceeding expectations while achieving the goals. You see, a high performing team looks at what do they need to do to up their game? What do they need to do to not just get decent results or expected results, but what can they do to bring it up a level? What can they do to really make sure that they're not only getting the results that's expected, but to get superior results? So your job as a leader is really understanding what people need to do in order to exceed that expectations. I call it the gold standard. What do they need to do to set up the gold standard? And having that mindset of delivering on that gold standard. Because high-performing teams kind of have these characteristics in common. So as a leader, it's your job to kind of make sure that these aspects and characteristics are always part of the team's makeup. Things like effective decision making. Does the team have that ability to make those quick decisions? And can they do it as a team? That there's clear and transparent communication. No hidden agendas on the team. Team members are willing to kind of work with each other and be able to have those kinds of tough communications so that they get things done. Is there trust on the team? Can the team really trust each other? Do they have their back? You know, because after all, team members go through peaks and valleys. Because after all, life happens. A family member might get sick, a child might get sick. There are issues with families. You never know what's happening, financial issues. So having each other's back is critical. How did the team manage conflict? We're going to talk about the conflict stage in a few minutes. But high-performing teams have a process to manage conflict. There are clear, defined goals and clear, defined roles and responsibilities. Each particular team member understands them. And lastly, there's a positive environment. The team loves to kind of work with each other, enjoys coming into work and kind of playing with each other, so to speak. So realizing your job is to kind of build that positive atmosphere for the team to function. Real and kind of important. But what's important as a leader is you have to understand the different stages of team development. What happens when your team gets developed, or when you're adding a new team member into the mix? Kind of what happens during these stages? And there are 5 critical stages that you need to understand as a leader. And they are for, number 1, forming. The second one is storming. The third is norming. Then we lead to performing, and last, it's adjourning. We're going to talk about each of these level steps and what's important for you to be thinking about as a leader. But a couple of things on this graphic I want you to understand. The stages are quite dynamic. So a team can shuffle around these various stages very quickly. So part of your job as a leader is to be able to understand where is the team at, especially if they're in the kind of storming stage and they're hanging around there for a while. And the storming stage is really about conflict. You know, if they're getting stuck, most likely productivity isn't happening. So your job is to make sure that it is happening. Your job is to make sure that if they're stuck there, to get them out of there. So we're going to talk about each of these stages so you have a better understanding of what you should be looking at, what that stage is all about, so that you can make sure your team is always progressing kind of in that performing stage. So let's talk about the first stage of forming. What happens here is, let's say, for example, you're creating a project team. What's happening is all these various people are coming into the project, and here's what they're thinking. First of all, they're saying to themselves, what's the purpose of this particular group? There's a lot of uncertainty happening in their minds. Why was I asked to be part of this group? What's my role and responsibility going to be with this group? Hey, there's Johnny. I worked with him in the last project. Boy, it didn't really go too well with him. So there's all these uncertainties that are racing in their mind. Because right now what they're thinking about is the task itself. We're formed together. There's some type of task that we're formed together for. What is it? And what they're starting to really think about is, what are the behaviors that are important here? What are the behaviors that are going to be acceptable on this particular team? A second stage that kind of goes in, and the one thing I'll talk about in regards to storming is kind of one of these stages that's always there. And I want you to think about this as all about is conflict and disagreement. Maybe disagreement in approach, disagreement on how to solve a problem. It could even be personality kind of challenges. But there is some type of hit on productivity. Productivity begins to slow in this stage. In some instances, it can be dramatically stagnated. Communication breakdowns are consistent in this particular stage. And what ends up happening is that negativity starts to kind of lead in. maybe negativity about people, negativity about a process. And what happens is when negativity starts brewing, it's like a cancer, it starts to develop and could start to grow. And in this stage, there is a drop in morale. People are not really excited about working on this team, and probably not excited about the task itself. Now, what ends up happening here is that it's like a storm that starts to happen where conflict just brews. And when nothing gets resolved, stagnation in terms of productivity happens. As a leader, it's important for you to recognize when the team is stuck in this stage. Because what happens is when they're stuck, this is where actions may take longer to get done. This is certainly going to cause delays in the project. But once you get through this stage, once you can resolve the conflict, there's what's called a hockey stick approach or a hockey stick effect, which means when things are stagnant and productivity just is level, once productivity or once that conflict is resolved, productivity will spike up like a hockey stick. So that's what you're going to notice as a leader. So as your role here is to identify and recognize that the storming stage is in effect and quickly and as quickly as you can get the team out of that stage. The third stage is norming. And quite frankly, I think norming really comes in the second stage when we kind of look at this. I really don't think it's the third stage in regards to the dynamics of the process of building a team. But norming is where we start looking at, this is where commitment starts to kind of get involved. This is when we start thinking about we as a team. It's not like what I can do, but it begins to really start to talk about we. We start beginning the process of trust, which means we start building the rules of behaviors that we're expecting from one another. This is when we're kind of what we're expecting as team members and what we need each team member to do. So productivity is relatively high here because we're still working through the process and forming those connections. And we're kind of in the vacuum of conflict avoidance. We don't want to have conflict. Hence is why I think this is kind of the second stage, because once we start forming those relationships, we start building this kind of stage where we start building acceptable behaviors. Fourth step is performing. This is when conflict at this point is resolved. And here is when morale is high, there's a sense of pride, communication's open, and there's mutual respect. Basically, the team is working on all cylinders. And as a leader, this is kind of the stage we want to try to keep them in at all costs. This is where we want to make sure that our teams are functioning, because if they're at this level, you're going to really get them to really understand, to be focused on the task and making sure that they're moving forward on it. So we want to get them here as quickly as possible. That's why as a leader, it's important to make sure that we get all those various things out of the way, especially the barriers of conflict, because when they're in there, they'll never get to this particular stage. The last stage is adjourning, which is once we complete the project, this is where we begin to dissociate from the project. We get a feeling of fulfillment. And it's kind of almost like the celebration stage where we achieve the goal, we achieve the focus of the task, and what we're trying to do here is celebrate. I will tell you, in regards to this particular step, in my work as a leadership coach, this is the most overlooked step. Because what usually happens is when a team achieves, let's say, a completion of a project, guess what we tend to do? We say, congratulations, here's the next project, and we kind of keep the pedal to the metal, and we have them jump on the next project. What it's important here as a leader is to spend time to celebrate success. Take time to say, hey, we achieved something great. What do we need to do to make sure we continue that to the next project? What can we improve on? Maybe it's solidifying the relationships on the team, kind of having the team members congratulate themselves. For me, back in my corporate days, what I used to do in this stage is I would bring the team out for a celebration. Maybe even bring them out for pizza or bring pizzas into the office, but to get them together to celebrate their accomplishments. So this is kind of like the 5 steps of team development that we need to stay focused on and really be thinking about as a leader. And as I mentioned earlier, each of these steps are dynamic, especially, the ones in the middle where we're talking about performing, norming, and storming. Realize your team could be moving from different stages of these, and really make sure you keep it tuned that they're always going to be at that performing stage, because that's where we want them to be. Because our goal here as a leader is really team cohesiveness. And when we're talking about team cohesiveness is working in unity to satisfy emotional needs. What we're looking at here is working together as a one collective unit. And if we kind of achieve cohesiveness, basically it means people enjoy working with each other, that they're all pulling the rope at the same time, they're all going and moving toward the same goal. And by doing that, they're getting their emotional needs because they're being team members together, working together to achieve a goal. Our goal as a leader should be thinking and looking at team cohesiveness, because here are some positive effects. We have less tension, we have higher optimism because people like being around each other. There is open communication, and of course there's increased productivity. So if we have a tight, cohesive team, and we're constantly moving toward a goal, these are the positive effects that can happen. But what happens if we don't have team cohesiveness? Well, there are 2 major things we need to be thinking about here when we look at team cohesiveness. We're looking at the performance norms, and again, the norms are kind of the expectations that we have of what behaviors that we're expecting the team members to be and do as the time that we're together. So we understand what's expected of each other. That's what you can think of the performance norms. When we talk about cohesiveness, is being able to work as a unit. So for example, if you look at the lower left of this grid, the one in the purple, where we have low performance norms and high cohesiveness. So in other words, we're a cohesive team, but we quite don't understand the kind of expected behaviors on our team. We're going to have moderate to low productivity. So there's going to be some productivity there, but not necessarily at the levels we need them to be. If you look on the far right, where cohesiveness is low, but performance norms are low, we're going to have low productivity because we're not working together as a unit and we're not understanding the performance norms. If you look in the top right, where we have moderate productivity, we have kind of a high expectations and understanding of the norms, but we have low cohesiveness. It means there'll be some moderate productivity. But the real goal that we're looking at here is the top left. Where we have high productivity, there is high cohesiveness and a high understanding of the performance norms. That, as a leader, is what we're trying to achieve. So again, it's important for you to really try to build that team on team cohesiveness, building that unity, but also making sure that people understand the expectations of the behaviors for the team to be successful. But here's why teams fail. Just a couple of things that you need to be thinking about. There's mistrust among team members. There is unclear expectations. And what's a big one is rewarding toxic people. If a toxic person on a team is doing something in a toxic way, meaning behavioral, maybe they're not putting in the effort, maybe they're coming in late, maybe they're not getting things done on time. As a leader, if we reward them, let's say we reward them in a way of giving them a day off or reward them in a promotion, the team sees this. And if the team sees that type of behavior and sees that that reward is given to that, well, teams are going to start to realize that maybe their efforts are not appreciated. When there's unclear expectations, guess what? That's on the leader side. So it's important for you as a leader to watch and look for some of these things. And we're going to wrap up shortly on some of the things as a leader that you should be worried about in terms of your behaviors. So here are the critical leader behaviors. Here are things as a leader when you're dealing with teams that you need to be thinking about. Number one, you need to have open communication. Your communication with the team has to be transparent. Second, you have to listen well. As a leader, you have to hear what's happening. You have to listen to their perspectives so that you can help guide them. So remember, your way is not necessarily the right way. Listening to what the team has to say is going to help them kind of achieve the goals they need to be. Thirdly, having a sense of humor. It helps you as a leader come across as humor. Now, I'm not asking you to come in like a comedian, but the ability to have self-deprecating humor, to maybe joke with the team members, to kind of liven up or kind of reduce the stress on what's happening in regards to project deadlines. Sense of humor has you come across as human, so it's good to display that. Having powerful language, meaning that your language is always uplifting, that instead of maybe talking about problems, you talk about challenges. That when you're trying to notice when the team is kind of in a conflict situation, using powerful, balanced language is going to help the team strive and be more productive. So you want to stay away from negative kind of language. Fifth, being decisive but flexible. Decide. Maybe the team is stuck in the storming stage, and maybe you have to make a decision. It's important that you be able to do that. Be good teachers. As a leader, it's important that you teach and coach. When they have challenges or they're having a barrier, kind of coach them through kind of situations is going to help them. Understanding individual capabilities. What are those things that the team does well? More importantly, what do the things that each individual team member does well? Being able to kind of look at that and saying, what do I need to do to get the most out of that person? Ninth, always have a goal orientation. What is our goal of a conversation? What is our goal of what's happening in a situation? What's our goal to get through this? So always have a goal in mind in anything that you're doing. And last, kind of really focus on the we. With teams, it's not about the I, it's about what do we do to get around things? What do we do to help kind of achieve the ultimate goal? So it's important for us to kind of look at making sure that the team is always functioning on that particular level. And of course, what's important for you as a leader is kind of monitoring those 5 stages that we talked about earlier, specifically the storming stage. Keeping your pulse on what's happening on the team so that if you're sensing they're in the storming stage, kind of guide them through it, help them resolve it. If they're a high performance team, they already have set a process to handle conflict. But if the conflict is deep, you might have to interject yourself to help them get through it so you can get them to the performance stage as quickly as possible. So, with all that said today, in terms of this whole thing of building teams, getting the right person on the bus, what's going to be your action plan in terms of looking at building effective teams? Was there something on today's show that's making you reflect on it that maybe you need to kind of make sure that you do better? Is it, I'm going to keep my pulse on the storming stage to make sure the team gets through those issues? Is it, I'm going to practice and make sure that as I'm adding people to a project, or maybe I'm creating new hires, what are those critical questions I might have to ask to get the right people on the bus? What do I have to do to assess I have the right people on the bus? And as I'm adding new people, what are those things that they're bringing to the team that's going to help the team perform better? So I ask you to kind of take a look at this and really kind of maybe adjust your approach as a leader on how you can build more effective teams. So that kind of wraps up today's show. So if there's anything we can do for your leadership needs, please reach out to us at www.getYourEdge.com, and we'd be more than happy to talk to you about what we can do to maybe help you with some of your leadership needs. So again, thanks for tuning in to today's show, and see you next time on the Leadership Edge.